In this video, we're going to be going over a brief introduction into metabolism and bioenergetics. All right, so to start off with some basic metabolic terminology, the term metabolism that you hear people say all the time, what it really means is the sum of all the chemical reactions in the body. So it's not just the energy producing chemical reactions or the energy breaking down chemical reactions like we often think of. All right, so metabolism can be divided into anabolic reactions and catabolic reactions. Anabolic reactions are the ones that synthesize or make a molecule so basically bringing two molecules or two more molecules together into a single molecule. That would be anabolic, where catabolic reactions would be taking a single molecule and breaking it down into more molecules, so smaller, simpler molecules. And then the term bioenergetics, which is really what we're trying to get after in this chapter set, is actually what most people mean when they say metabolism. So they mean the conversion of foodstuffs into energy that the body can then use for different processes like movements and exercise and lots of other things. All right, so by foodstuffs, I'm talking specifically the energy containing macronutrients, so the carbohydrates, the fats, the proteins, and also when it's present, alcohol can contribute to energy production. Of course, it's not recommended to do that, but it can be done. So when I talk about energy, what I'm actually talking about is a molecule called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. And this is the basic unit of energy that the body uses. And it's the energy molecule that powers a lot of things in the body that we need, including exercise and muscle contractions and things like that. So ATP consists of an adenine molecule, a ribose molecule, and three linked phosphate molecules making up the TP part, so the triphosphate. And so when we are making ATP, which is what we do in bioenergetics, we're going to be typically taking an ADP molecule, so an adenosine diphosphate, so two phosphates, and we're going to be adding a phosphate to it, making it into ATP, so three phosphates. All right, so that process is called adenosine diphosphate phosphorylation, or ADP phosphorylation. And it's simply creating an ATP molecule from an ADP molecule and an inorganic phosphate. So adding the two together to make an ATP molecule. And of course, it's going to get more complicated than that, but this is the simplest explanation of how we create energy in the body. So let's go over the basic bioenergetic pathways. And this is just a real brief overview. We're going to be going over each of these in more detail in later videos within this series here. All right, so we're going to have some anaerobic processes. These are processes that don't require any oxygen. And we're going to have some aerobic processes, which are the ones that do require oxygen. So looking at the anaerobic processes first, we have immediate energy sources and fast energy sources. The immediate energy sources are going to be first the stored ATP. And what I mean by this is I'm just talking about the energy that was produced before that's just kind of sitting around the muscle waiting to be used. So we always have a little bit of ATP in our muscles or in the cells of the body that can be used on demand. And that's what I mean by stored ATP. So once the stored ATP starts to get used up, then we need to switch over to phosphocreatine as a way of creating the ATP. These together are our immediate energy sources because the stored ATP is the energy that's just sitting there in the phosphocreatine system is a really, really fast, basically instantaneous system for recreating that ATP. All right, and then we go to our fast energy sources. So now we're not quite as quick as being immediate, but still very, very quick. And this is going to be glycolysis. This is the system that breaks down carbohydrate, ending in this case, lactate if it's an anaerobic metabolism. And if we have aerobic metabolism, keeping up with metabolism, or keeping up with the energy needs, then we have glycolysis that ends in pyruvate. And we'll get into these details again in another video. I'll link to that video down in the description below this where we'll talk about glycolysis. And with the aerobic metabolism going through the glycolysis pathway, ending in pyruvate, that would then go through the aerobic pathways of the Krebs cycle, followed by the electron transport chain, which is also called oxidative phosphorylation. And there's different names for the Krebs cycle as well, the TCA cycle, the tricarboxylic acid cycle, citric acid cycle as well. All right, so this is carbohydrate breakdown. Again, these two are really the same processes. These are both glycolysis. It's just whether it happens quickly, it ends in lactate, and it can be fully anaerobic. If it happens more slowly, it produces pyruvate as its last product, and that goes into aerobic metabolism, which is a good thing. It makes a lot more energy that way. All right, so again, this is carbohydrates. Let's talk about fats. All right, so the process of making energy from fats is beta oxidation, and this is going to be creating some molecules that will go also into the Krebs cycle, just like the aerobic version of glycolysis did. And so it goes into the Krebs cycle and then eventually into the electron transport chain, and it produces a lot of energy that way. Notice that we have carbohydrates, we have fats. We do not have protein listed on this slide. There's a reason for that, and let's go over that right now. Protein is just amino acids bound to nitrogen in such a way that basically our body can make use of it. And so from 1 gram of protein, we can liberate 4.1 kilocalories of energy if we need to. All right, so big caveat there is if we need to. If we overconsume protein, our bodies do not store protein as protein. We do have stored protein in our skeletal muscle and some other tissues and organs, but it's within the structure. We don't typically want to pull that protein out for anything, because that would mean breaking down your muscles, breaking down your organs. All right, so, but if we do overconsume protein, what we end up doing is we store it as body fat through lipogenesis, so just the creation of fat. When we use protein for energy, that process, or that it's sort of an umbrella term really, is called protein catabolism. It just means breaking down proteins. It is breaking it down into that nitrogen and those individual amino acids. The amino acids can be converted into various metabolic intermediaries that go into the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle. One of the common ones would be acetyl-CoA. Normally, protein catabolism contributes very little to our bioenergetic energy production. Somewhere between 2 and 10% is the typical range, and usually it's closer to that 2% range. In longer endurance type exercise, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, ultra marathons even, or in starvation type situations, it will contribute a greater and greater percentage of our total energy, up to about 10%. But again, normally we hover more closely to the 2% range. So protein minimally involved with the creation of energy. So what do we actually want to use protein for? We actually want to use protein in order to build up the tissues of the body, the skeletal muscle, right? The organs, heart, all that is very protein rich. The entire body is almost made of protein. Very few tissues aren't made of protein. And so we don't usually want to use protein for energy because we want to shuttle it towards maintaining and building and growing tissues. So again, protein, just to sort of drill this home, protein is not typically a major energy source during exercise or during rest. We do not want to use protein if we can avoid it. This is a very brief overview on bioenergetics, and we did get into protein here simply because I wanted to point out the fact that protein is not really a major part of bioenergetics. We'll have additional videos where I specifically go over carbohydrates and go over fats separately. And I'll also have a video talking about the immediate sources of energy when we start to exercise.